Hello everyone, before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Get out. Now. The words tore through the golden ballroom like a blade dragged across glass. Conversations died mid-sentence. 100 chandeliers shimmered above the crowd, their crystals trembling as if even the light flinched from the sound. All eyes snapped toward the center of the room, toward the two women standing face to face like opposing forces carved from two different worlds. On the left, a black woman in a sleek white satin gown, posture tall, shoulders relaxed, expression unreadable. Her hair was sculpted into an elegant crown, catching the chandelier glow like a quiet halo. She did not move. She did not blink. She simply existed with the kind of stillness that unnerves people who rely on noise to feel powerful. On the right, a heiress draped in a crimson off-shoulder dress, fury tightening every muscle of her face. Her finger jabbed the air, inches from the other woman's chest. The gesture was sharp, practiced, like someone who'd spent her life pointing at people she believed were beneath her. Behind her, the billionaire family Hale of Montgomery stood in a perfectly staged semicircle. Men in tailored black tuxedos. Women in glittering gowns. All frozen. All watching. Some horrified. Some entertained. Some ready to film. Security should have removed you the moment you stepped inside, the heiress hissed, her voice cracking into the kind of shrill confidence only inherited wealth can produce. You don't belong here. You never did. The crowd shifted, a ripple of discomfort passing through lace and silk. A waiter nearly dropped a tray. A donor's hand rose reflexively to her chest. In the far corner, a reporter raised her camera not out of curiosity, but instinct. Moments like this always meant something ugly was about to happen. And yet, the black woman didn't break. Her breath didn't hitch. Her eyes didn't shimmer with humiliation. She simply looked at the heiress as though measuring the weight of the insult, letting it sit in the air just long enough for everyone to feel its gravity. Wineglasses vibrated softly on the tables. Candle flames flickered. The golden walls seemed to tighten around the room as the tension climbed, step by deliberate step. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. The heiress leaned in. People like you don't get invitations to rooms like this, she said, each word dripping slow, acidic, deliberate. So I'll say it again. Leave. Phones rose behind her, sleek rectangles glinting beneath chandelier light, circling in like predators who smelled fresh blood. Guests angled themselves for a better view. A woman in a champagne gown whispered, "This is going to be everywhere by morning." Yet the black woman remained still, as though chaos had no jurisdiction over her. She looked around slowly, not at the heiress, not at the guests, but at the room itself. At the chandeliers. At the candelabras. At the marble floors. At the billionaire dynasty watching her as if her dignity were part of tonight's entertainment. Then she looked back at the heiress. And she smiled. It wasn't warm. It wasn't cruel. It was quiet, so quiet that it made the heiress falter, just for a breath. Because it wasn't the smile of someone losing. It was the smile of someone deciding. A phone buzzed softly in the black woman's hand. She glanced down at the screen. And the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, the ballroom didn't breathe. The phone buzzed again in her hand, soft, precise, almost too quiet for a room this grand. Yet somehow the sound sliced through the silence like a scalpel. Guests stiffened. The heiress in red blinked, thrown off by the calmness radiating from the woman she had just tried to humiliate. The black woman lifted the phone, not rushing, not flinching. The chandelier glow slid across her features, revealing a face that was no longer merely composed. There was intention there now. Quiet, measured, and dangerously still. The heiress scoffed, trying to recover control. "Are you seriously checking messages right now? I'm talking to you." But her tone faltered. She could feel it. Something in the air had shifted, something small but undeniable. A thread pulled loose. Behind her, the semicircle of wealthy patrons leaned forward unconsciously. The murmurs died. Glass stems grew still between fingertips. The spotlight that had once crowned the heiress now fell unevenly between both women, as if the room itself was reconsidering who it belonged to. The black woman lowered the phone just enough for the screen's reflection to glow faintly against her gown. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was soft. Too soft. And that softness frightened the heiress more than any raised voice could have. "I heard you," she said. A simple sentence. But the cadence, the calm weight behind it, carried a message far deeper than the words themselves. It was the tone of someone choosing patience when she did not need to. The heiress stepped back half an inch. Only half. But the entire room noticed. Near the bar, a man whispered to his wife, "Why does it feel like she's the one in control?" His wife didn't answer. Her eyes never left the woman in white. Another buzz. This time the crowd reacted, tiny flinches, exchanged glances, the uneasy realization that whoever was on the other end of that phone was not an ordinary contact. Not a friend. Not a relative. Something bigger. The heiress swallowed. "You're ignoring me," she said, but the words sounded smaller now, stripped of their earlier bravado. The black woman didn't look at her this time. Instead, she slowly scanned the room, taking in every face, the cautious stares, the hungry curiosity, the discomfort beginning to bloom in the corners of polished smiles. Each gaze she met seemed to recoil slightly, as though the truth was dawning in real time. She was not who they thought she was. And the room felt it. The temperature shifted. Not colder, sharper. Cleaner. Like the air before a storm that didn't roar, but arrived on silent feet. The black woman's eyes lifted to the balcony above, where the event's organizers stood frozen. Their expressions gave something away. Recognition? Fear? A hint that they knew she was someone of weight, though they tried to hide it? She looked back to the heiress, who visibly braced as if expecting retaliation. Instead, the woman in white simply breathed in, slow and deliberate. It wasn't defeat. It was assessment. Calculation. A quiet verdict forming behind her eyes. The kind of silence that makes a room buckle. Every guest felt the shift now. A ripple. A resetting of power. The kind of collective awareness that spreads without a word. The wrong person had been insulted tonight. And the woman in red, for the first time, seemed to understand it too. Her voice wavered. "Who, exactly are you?" The black woman didn't answer. Not yet. But the faint smile that touched her lips told the room that an answer was coming, a truth that would not just change the mood, but the fate of everyone watching. And it would arrive soon. With precision. With consequence. And with no need to raise her voice. For most people in that ballroom, the woman in white was still a mystery, an inconvenience, a distraction, a mistake to be corrected. But for those paying closer attention, something else was forming in the quiet space around her, a presence. The kind that wasn't announced with applause or titles, but with poise sharpened by decades of endurance. Her name was Amara Sterling. And she had never needed a spotlight to own a room. Long before tonight's humiliation, long before the heiress in red pointed a trembling finger at her, Amara had learned that dignity was a kind of currency, one that held its value even when the world tried to bankrupt you. She grew up in a two-bedroom apartment above a shuttered hardware store on Chicago's South Side. Her mother worked 2 shifts at a hospital laundry. Her father repaired HVAC units for buildings that would never hire him full-time because of the color of his skin. They didn't have wealth, but they had something harder to measure: expectation. The expectation that Amara would rise, not because the world made room for her, but because she would carve space where none existed. At 14, she wrote code on a borrowed laptop. At 17, she won a national science competition using scrap circuit boards. At 20, she founded her first company from a dorm room lit only by a flickering desk lamp and a dream no one else could see. By 28, she had built the algorithm that would change predictive markets. By 35, she owned the patents the world's largest conglomerates fought over. By 40, she became one of the quietest but most powerful forces in financial technology, an architect of systems that moved billions without ever needing her face on a magazine cover. And by 46, she controlled Sterling Nexus Holdings, a network of companies valued at over $58 billion, companies the Hale Montgomery dynasty privately depended on to survive. But no one in this golden room knew that. They'd only seen her gown, her skin, her silence, and made their judgment. What they couldn't see was the lineage wrapped around her like invisible armor: every grandmother who cleaned houses they couldn't afford to live in, every ancestor who worked without recognition, every door slammed in her face until she learned to build her own. Amara didn't merely succeed. She survived. She evolved. She ascended. And she did it without bending her spine for anyone. Tonight was supposed to be simple. A quiet entrance. A brief greeting to the Hale Montgomery patriarch. A moment of civility before their companies announced a $4.9 billion merger, one that would save their collapsing empire and expand hers. She'd imagined handshakes, champagne, maybe even mutual respect. Instead, she'd been told to get out. And the irony wasn't lost on her. The heiress still hovered nearby, breath unsteady, eyes narrowed as if she were trying to place Amara's face on a mental list of people who mattered, and failing. That very blindness, that entitled certainty of who belonged and who didn't, was the same arrogance that had doomed dynasties long before tonight. Amara glanced once more at her phone, the message still glowing on the screen. Documents finalized. Awaiting your approval. J. Yarrow, Chief Legal Counsel. 90 minutes earlier, she would have signed without hesitation. Now. The decision lived on the edge of her breath. She raised her eyes. Half the ballroom was still watching her, still unsure, still waiting to understand what exactly was unfolding. They had no idea that the woman they dismissed as an intruder was, in fact, the architect of the very lifeline their hosts were clinging to. They didn't know that she owned half the pipelines that fed their portfolios. They didn't know that she had the power to make the entire Hale Montgomery empire evaporate with a single instruction. And they certainly didn't know she was already considering it. In the glittering stillness, Amara slipped her phone back into her clutch. Her decision wasn't spoken yet. But it was coming. And when it landed, the whole room would feel the floor shift beneath their feet. Across the ballroom, beyond the glittering towers of champagne flutes and the orchestral hum trembling beneath crystal chandeliers, stood the Hale Montgomery family, the dynasty everyone in the room pretended not to fear. Old money. Old power. Old arrogance lacquered in gold. But beneath that gold was rot. No one saw it at first. Not the donors vying for their attention. Not the reporters snapping photos of their curated smiles. Not even the guests whispering their names like incantations. But cracks always reveal themselves under pressure, and tonight, the pressure had arrived wearing a white gown and unshakable composure. The patriarch, Richard Hale Montgomery, towered at the edge of the semicircle, jaw carved from polished marble, hair silvered like a crown no one had the courage to question. His suit was bespoke. His cufflinks older than the hotel. And yet his eyes betrayed something brittle, a man carrying debt like a second skin. For years, Richard had played the part of the titan flawlessly, hosting galas, sitting on boards, giving interviews about legacy and vision. But behind the curtains, behind the private meetings and the private loans and the private panic, his empire was collapsing one numbered spreadsheet at a time. The merger with Sterling Nexus wasn't a triumph. It was a lifeline. A lifeline he didn't know he'd just severed. Beside him stood Victoria Hale Montgomery, the matriarch, wrapped in emerald silk that shimmered beneath the chandeliers. Her smile, once sharp and effortless, now flickered on and off like a faulty bulb. She was the architect of appearances, the keeper of social order, the judge of who belonged and who didn't. In her world, power was a performance, and she never missed a cue. Until now. Her daughter's public outburst had shattered the illusion she curated for decades. The way Victoria stared at the woman in white, not with hatred, but with dawning fear, revealed it all. She sensed that something irreversible had just happened. Then there was Celeste, the heiress in red, still standing stiff from the confrontation, still puffing herself up with entitlement she hadn't earned. She had grown up in ballrooms like this, learning the art of social cruelty before she learned algebra. She mistook wealth for wisdom, influence for intelligence, proximity for power. And that mistake would cost her more than she could fathom. Near the back stood her brother, James, swirling a glass of bourbon with the detached interest of a man who'd failed at every business venture he touched. A trust fund shadow. A spectator in his family's empire, never a builder in it. He watched Amara not with contempt, but with curiosity, like he sensed, on some primal level, that she was not prey but predator. Around them, their guests whispered, uncertain. What's happening? Who is she? Why is the family rattled? No one had answers. But unease had a scent. It drifted through the room now, sharper than the perfume in champagne. Because here was the truth no one in the ballroom knew. The Hale Montgomery empire was already drowning. Real estate portfolios hollowed out by property downturns. Private equity funds hemorrhaging cash. A web of subsidiaries surviving only through short-term credit. And the only thing keeping them afloat was the forthcoming Sterling Nexus deal, a $4.9 billion infusion that would restore solvency, silence creditors, and keep their empire standing. But the woman they had just humiliated, the one in white, silent and composed, was not a guest. She was the very signature they needed. The oxygen in their lungs. The rescue line they didn't deserve. The one person who could save them or bury them. And right now, she was watching them crumble without lifting a finger. The truth settled over the ballroom like falling ash. They had mocked the wrong woman. And the consequences, though not yet spoken, were already in motion. The ballroom's music had faded to a ghost of itself, the orchestra caught in that awkward limbo between continuing the performance and sensing that something far more consequential was unfolding on the floor below. Guests hovered in half poses, unsure whether to sip their drinks or hold their breath. The room no longer belonged to the Hale Montgomerys. It belonged to the pause, the impossible, razor-thin pause, before a seismic shift. And Amara Sterling stood at the center of it. Her clutch vibrated again, the third notification in under a minute. But this time she opened it. The glow from the screen lit her face, soft but unmistakably purposeful. No one else could see the message, but the tension that rippled outward from her fingertips told the room everything. Whatever she was reading, it mattered. Celeste, still clinging to the last threads of a collapsing performance, stepped forward and tried to reclaim authority. "If you don't leave, I'll have security drag you out myself," she snapped, but the sharpness in her voice had dulled. "You're disrupting an important evening." Amara didn't look up immediately. She let the words hang, exposed and trembling in the golden air. When she finally lifted her gaze, it was not angry. It wasn't even dismissive. It was decisive. "I see," she murmured. Just 2 words. But they silenced even the clinking glasses at the far end of the hall. Richard Hale Montgomery took a step forward now, sensing danger the way old captains sense storms, by instinct, not reason. "Miss, whoever you are," he said carefully, "there's no need for this confrontation. Let's resolve the misunderstanding privately." A few guests nodded eagerly, hungry for normalcy. But normalcy had already left the building. Amara glanced toward the balcony, where event planners watched her as if awaiting a signal. Then at the legal team station discreetly near the bar, people most guests hadn't noticed were even present. Then back at her screen. Her eyes sharpened. The universe seemed to lean in. And she pressed the call button. A crisp voice answered instantly, amplified just enough by the room's acoustics for those closest to her to hear. "Miss Sterling, we have the final documents ready. All they need is your go-ahead." The Hale Montgomery circle froze. Celeste's smile twitched violently. Richard's throat tightened. Victoria's hand flew to her necklace. Guests turned in unison, like a school of startled fish. Amara didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The room had bent itself around her silence long enough to recognize its power. "Thank you," she replied. "Execute contingency protocol." A beat. Then the legal counsel asked, more cautiously this time, "Are you certain, Miss Sterling? It will terminate the entire transaction." Every eye locked on her. Celeste's breath hitched. Victoria's knees wavered. Richard swayed, just slightly, as though the ground beneath him had shifted an inch. Amara looked directly at the heiress in red, the woman who had jabbed a finger in her face and told her to leave her own negotiation. Her voice was calm enough to chill bone. "I'm certain." The counsel didn't hesitate. "Yes, ma'am. Protocol is now in motion." Click. The ballroom didn't erupt, it imploded. Not with sound, but with realization, a sudden, sickening collapse of assumptions shared by every guest who had watched the scene unfold. Celeste finally whispered the question she'd been avoiding all night. What protocol?" But everyone already knew. Whatever line the Hale Montgomery dynasty had been standing on. It had just been cut. It began quietly. Too quietly. A shift in the air, a stiffening of posture, a ripple of confusion passing through tuxedos and sequin gowns as 3 dark-suited individuals stepped into the ballroom from separate entrances. They did not rush. They did not announce themselves. They simply arrived, with briefcases, tablets, and the unmistakable aura of people who carried consequences, not champagne. Richard Hale Montgomery recognized the insignia on their lanyards and blanched. "God, no," he whispered. But it was far too late. The woman at the front, tall, silver-streaked hair, expression honed by years of corporate warfare, stopped beside Amara with a subtle bow of acknowledgement. "Miss Sterling," she said, voice calm, crisp, and devastatingly clear, "we've initiated contingency protocol. Systems are locking now." Gasps sliced through the room. Victoria clutched the back of a chair. Celeste stopped breathing altogether. The lead attorney tapped her tablet. Per your directive, the Sterling Nexus Hale-Montgomery merger is formally revoked. All pending capital injections are frozen. Supply chain guarantees are void. Credit lines extended under Sterling subsidiaries are being withdrawn effective immediately. Each sentence landed like a hammer strike. Guests stared at one another, mouths open, knuckles white, suddenly understanding they were not witnessing drama, but downfall. The attorney continued, voice steady as stone. In addition, per Clause 47B, Sterling Nexus will begin proceedings to recall outstanding loans tied to Hale-Montgomery Real Estate Holdings. Richard staggered. That's half our portfolio. That, the attorney said gently, is correct. Celeste's hands flew to her temples. This is insane. You can't just walk in here, Anne. Amara turned to her, and the heiress froze mid-sentence. She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. You insisted I leave the room, Amara said, her tone soft but sharpened by intent. So I did. I left the deal, too. A low, stunned murmur rippled across the ballroom. No theatrics. No cruelty. Just consequence, carried out with the precision of a scalpel. Screens on the event's media wall flickered as live market tickers refreshed. Hale-Montgomery Group, -7%. -9%. -12%. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Oh my God, it's happening in real time." Amara stood still in the center of the unfolding storm, untouched by it, illuminated yet unbothered by the chandelier's trembling glow. Her silence wasn't the silence of retreat. It was the silence of power finally unmasked. And as the attorney delivered the final blow, all affiliations with Sterling Nexus are terminated permanently. The dynasty that once mocked her felt the ground open beneath their feet. The fall had begun. Panic does not always arrive with screams. Sometimes it enters quietly, through vibrating phones, widening eyes, trembling fingers gripping champagne stems. And in the Hale-Montgomery ballroom, panic moved like a silent contagion. Notifications erupted across the room. One phone buzzed. Then another. Then 20. A hedge fund director near the bar inhaled sharply. Jesus, their stock just dropped 15%. A woman in a gold gown clutched her clutch to her chest. My husband's firm has a joint venture with them, oh God. The whispers spread like wildfire, licking its way through dry leaves. She canceled the entire deal? 4.9 billion gone? Are we watching a dynasty collapse in real time? And they were. Because Amara Sterling had not simply withdrawn from the merger. She had pulled the linchpin holding their empire together. And empires fall fast when the world discovers they were standing on borrowed time. Richard Hale-Montgomery stumbled backward, bracing himself on a chair as if the floor had tilted. Victoria's breath grew shallow, her perfectly manicured composure cracking like porcelain under a hammer. But the shift spreading through the ballroom wasn't only fear. It was reversal. Guests who had smirked at Celeste's cruelty now quietly stepped away from her, as if distance could absolve them. A socialite who had laughed earlier slipped off her diamond cuff to hide the Hale-Montgomery family crest engraved inside. Allegiances were dissolving with the speed of falling stock prices. A senator approached Amara cautiously, bowing his head. Miss Sterling, if there is anything my office can. She didn't even look at him. He stepped back, chastened. Even the orchestra sensed the change. No one had given them a cue, but the musicians lowered their instruments, staring at Amara with the reverence of people realizing the true guest of honor had never been the hosts. At the center of the room, Celeste stood frozen, makeup flawless but spirit fractured. Her voice came out small, nothing like the venom she wielded earlier. "Please, you didn't have to do this." Amara turned toward her slowly. The room held its breath. "I didn't do anything," she said softly. "You did." A single sentence. Balanced perfectly between truth and judgment. Guests winced, some looked away entirely, unable to endure the reflection of their own complicity shimmering in the chandeliers above. On the media wall behind them, another ticker flashed. Hale Montgomery Group, minus 23%. A man near the aisle whispered, "This is historic." Another replied, "No, this is justice." Amara watched the shifting room with quiet clarity. No triumph. No gloating. Just the stillness of someone who had expected this day long before anyone else had. And above her, the chandelier flickered. As if bowing. The collapse of an empire should have been loud. Chaotic. Violent. But in the Hale Montgomery ballroom, it arrived as a hush. A heavy, trembling hush. Every eye was on Amara now, not out of curiosity, not out of doubt, but out of the dawning understanding that the center of gravity in the room had shifted, permanently. Celeste stepped back, her red gown shimmering like a warning flare. Richard and Victoria stood frozen, the dynasty they had curated collapsing behind their eyes. No one spoke. No one dared to. Amara finally broke the silence. Slowly, gracefully, she reached into her clutch. A ripple of dread moved through the guests. It wasn't what she pulled out. It was how she did it, calm, unhurried, as though the moment belonged entirely to her. She revealed a single business card. Black metal. Edges beveled. Letters etched in platinum. It caught the chandelier light and threw it back in a cold, sharp gleam. Richard inhaled sharply, the sound of recognition snapping through a man who suddenly understood the measure of his mistake. Amara held the card between two fingers, not offering it, not flaunting it, simply letting the room see it. "My name," she said softly, "is Amara Sterling." A collective gasp rippled outward like a shockwave. Several guests clapped a hand to their mouths. One staggered. Another whispered, "No, no, it can't be her." But the truth bloomed across their faces, unmistakable and merciless. Amara continued, voice quiet enough to force everyone to lean in. Founder and CEO of Sterling Nexus Holdings. Celeste's knees buckled. Victoria clutched her pearls so tightly the strand creaked. Richard's eyes flooded with the realization of a man watching his future disintegrate grain by grain. Amara stepped closer, not threatening, not dramatic, simply present. "The merger your family depended on," she said, "required only one thing to move forward." She lifted the card slightly. "My signature." Silence detonated through the ballroom. Sharp. Absolute. Unforgiving. A woman near the aisle whispered, "They tried to throw out the person they needed most." Another corrected her, voice trembling. "No, they tried to throw out the person who owned the room." Amara turned her gaze to Celeste, who now looked impossibly small in her crimson gown. "You believed I didn't belong here," Amara said. "But belonging is not dictated by arrogance or lineage." She let the card fall back into her clutch. "Belonging," she finished, "is earned. And tonight, you earned your consequences." The chandelier flickered as if bowing once more. And the ballroom, once a shrine to the Hale Montgomery dynasty, stood still under the weight of a new truth. The woman they mocked was the very force capable of erasing their name from history. And she had just chosen to do exactly that. The ballroom, once roaring with wealth, music, and curated elegance, now felt like a cathedral after a storm. Nothing moved except the dust motes drifting beneath the chandelier's trembling glow. The Hale Montgomery dynasty, moments ago the untouchable royalty of the evening, now stood hollowed out by a truth they could not outrun. Amara Sterling didn't gloat. She didn't bask in victory. She simply stood as though reclaiming gravity itself. Richard attempted to speak, but the words never formed. His throat constricted around the reality that his empire, his legacy, had been held together by the hand of the very woman he had allowed his daughter to humiliate. Victoria looked older than she had in years, her shoulders slumped beneath the crushing weight of consequence. Celeste could no longer meet Amara's eyes. Across the room, the screens continued their merciless descent. Hale Montgomery Group, minus 31%. Minus 38%. Minus 44%. The kind of numbers that didn't rebound. The kind that signaled permanent collapse. Guests began to withdraw, not just physically, but socially, emotionally, strategically. They slid off their chairs, stepped out of their cliques, recalculated allegiances at lightning speed. Someone whispered, "We backed the wrong side." Another muttered, "She saved herself." They destroyed themselves. And still, Amara remained steady. As if hearing a question no one had dared ask, she spoke, not loud, not sharp, but with a depth that vibrated across the marble floor. "You all witnessed what happens," she said, "when arrogance is given a microphone and dignity is treated as disposable." A murmur rose. Not protest, agreement. She continued, her tone even, almost gentle. "I didn't end your empire tonight," she said, turning to Richard. "You did. Every unexamined assumption. Every unchecked cruelty. Every door you closed on people who could have stood beside you. No one dared breathe." Amara's gaze softened, not with forgiveness, but with clarity. "Power isn't what you own," she said. "It's what you honor." Then she turned, not to the dynasty, not to the guests, but to the small team waiting discreetly by the entrance. They straightened as she approached. The doors opened with reverence rather than protocol. But before she exited, Amara paused and addressed the room one final time. "The $4.9 billion you lost tonight." She let the words settle like settling dust. "We'll build something better than your legacy ever could." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. But the truth was this. The capital once meant to rescue the Hale Montgomery empire would now seed a national initiative, tech incubators, educational grants, and startup funding for underrepresented youth. The kind of investment that built futures, not dynasties. When Amara stepped through the doorway, the chandelier flickered once more, as if bowing in acknowledgement to the only true authority the room had seen all night. Outside, the world waited with headlines already forming. Inside, the dynasty remained standing. But only in the way ruins stand. Upright, but broken. Justice hadn't shouted. It hadn't stormed. It had simply walked out. Wearing a white gown. And leaving silence to finish the lesson.